Let's now turn our attention to talk about how stable an economy is, or in other words, if something goes wrong, can the economy self-adjust and get back on track where everybody's happy? So let's kind of define what happy is. Let's look at, I'm going to draw a nice little supply and demand curve here. This is aggregate supply, and this is aggregate demand. Now, when I say aggregate supply and aggregate demand, I mean that's the demand for all goods and services, and aggregate supply, that's the supply for all goods and services for the economy. So this is a way to visualize the economy. And so equilibrium output, that's how much is being produced, equilibrium output. And the equilibrium price level is the inflation rate. Now, this P sub E and Q sub E, that's an example of where we are. That's reality. In other words, this is what we're producing. The question is this enough output to put everybody who wants to work? What if I said to you that in order to put everybody to work, you need to produce at least this much? I call this QF for full employment level of output. I mean, a good example would be if you have a factory, here's my example of a factory. This is, smokestack here, smoke coming out. Here's little windows. Here's a little door. Now, this factory produces, let's say, automobiles. Now, the question is, if you want to employ all 100 of your workers, how many automobiles do you have to produce to justify having 100 workers working in the factory? You could see that if there are too few automobiles being produced, you won't need to use all 100 workers. So this example that I just gave you with the factory is what I was drawing up here in the supply and demand curve, right? What I'm saying here is, if you want all of your workers employed, you need to produce at least this much output. But like I told you before, the economy is only producing this much output. That's a problem. The question is, how do we get QE equal to QF? That's how we use supply and demand to try to visualize a problem in the economy. In other words, there isn't enough output to put everyone to work. And why would that happen? Well, it could be because people are not spending enough. If people don't spend enough money, there isn't a justification to produce more output. So total spending doesn't always match output at the desired full employment level. Remember, that's Q sub F. So the circular flow helps us illustrate how this undesirable outcome comes about. So let's talk about this income circular flow. What do we have here? We have two market participants, right? Firms and households, and they interact in two different markets. They interact in the product market. That's where you buy and sell finished goods and services. And then you've got the input market. That's where you buy and sell factors of production, land, labor, raw materials, that sort of thing. So firms, they need to buy inputs for their factory, and in return, they pay money. Now, households, they get paid because they're offering their labor in the input market. Now, firms produce goods and services that take to market. Hopefully they sell it and they get some money. Now, who bought it? Well, households took their income to the product market and they bought the goods and services that they produced. This is the income circular flow. Now look at the outer circle. The outer circle, what's flowing here? Either goods and services are flowing this way or inputs are flowing this way. What about the other circle? That's what you see right here, the inner circle. And what's flowing here? Well, money is flowing in this direction. And this is how the economy, it could be visualized in a way, right? Now, if all of the income earned here is spent here, we can maintain the level of output or the level of activity here. The problem is, what happens when households earn some money, but they don't spend all of that money in the product market? Well, that's when we can get some problems where spending does not match is not enough to justify the level of output in the economy. And what could cause spending to drop? Well, leakages out of the income circular flow could cause that. Now, what's a leakage? Well, for example, when you earn money from your employer, your income is taxed. That's a leakage. That prevents you from spending all that money in the product market. That's one example of what could prevent a consumer of spending all of the income that they earned. Now, much of the leakages are injected back into the income circular flow. For example, when your income is taxed, the government spending is an injection back into the income circular flow. So if injections and leakages equal each other, they cancel each other out. So there's no impact on economic activity. The problem arises is when leakages are greater than injections. When that happens, more money is leaking out of the economy that's being injected back in, and that could cause economic activity to drop. I mean, it's very similar to, let's say, a balloon. That's a balloon. So this is a balloon. This is a little balloon right here, right? Now, if air is leaking out of a hole, and it is leaking out faster than it could be pumped back in. So this is a pump up and down. If air is being pumped into the balloon, but air is leaking out faster, the balloon is going to contract. Let me give you another way of looking at that type of contraction with the income circular flow. Let's say households earn some money, right? Households earn some money from offering their labor to producers. And let's say they save some of it before they spend it, right? They save some in terms of a bank. That means they're not going to be spending all of the money in the product market on the goods and services that were produced. And this is going to cause the level of activity to shrink. So think of it as balloon shrinking. So shrinking like this. That means the output drops, and so does employment. Now, how can that money get injected back into the income circular flow? Well, if a household saves money, a bank could loan that money out to, let's say, a firm, and that money could find its way back into the economy. And if leakages, this is a leakage, right? Leakage equals injections, the level of activity can be maintained. The problem is when there's an imbalance, when these two are not equal. So the main focus of macroeconomics is the concern of whether desired injections will offset desired leakages, so we can get full employment, making sure everybody who wants a job can have a job. So that's where we'll leave it off for now, and then our next video we'll continue this conversation.